Hello, everybody. Welcome to SoundWaves. Thank you so much for coming. And it's great to bring SoundWaves into our space. We usually do it in the Discovery building. And sometimes we come over here. We've done it in Collins Hall. And there was one time we did it in Mills Hall. That was difficult. This is our first time in our big concert hall. And it's great to see so many people here. And to finish out our season, all season long we've been talking about development, so this will be part 4 of our development series. We've been talking to some people who are regular SoundWaves goers to see how they feel the series is going, and we've gotten some feedback that people would like to hear more music. So we are previewing tonight next year's format. And that is just very slightly different. We will have some music at the beginning, and then we will have 3 presenters instead of 4, and then plus me, and then more music at the end. So a little more music, a little bit fewer people talking, but the same length of time. And do let us know. Find me or Sam or Francesca, who are with my partners from Discovery, and tell us what you think of that new format. We'll be test driving that all next year as well. We've collaborated now. We're working towards 60 departmental collaborations. So for those of you who've been to many SoundWaves events, we're just learning so much about our world, and that will continue with tonight's program. But before, we'll have our little prelude performance by Christopher Taylor on the piano. So thank you, and I'll see you in an hour or so.
Okay, well that is a tough act to follow, but I will step in. Let's see here. Is this advancing? I'm not sure if the clicker is going here. Yeah, green in the middle. Not going. And not happening. Okay, we'll go old-fashioned clicking style. Okay, hi, I'm Jack Williams. I'm in the Department of Geography and the Center for Climatic Research of the Nelson Institute for Environmental Studies here at UW-Madison. You can see beautiful, of course, Lake Mendota there and the terrace and the shoreline. Maybe you can see it, maybe you can't, but there's a red brick building, Science Hall. That's where I work. And so the work that I do, I come out of a geology background as well. I study how species respond and adapt to climate change, working across space as a geographer and across time as a geologist, using the last ice age as a model system for understanding how species respond to large, abrupt, and novel climate changes like those happening around us right now. So with this picture of Madison in your minds as Madison today, here's what Madison would have looked like 20,000 years ago. And as we all know, I think everybody here knows, we were under ice. We were pretty close to the southern edge of the Laurentide ice sheet, this mile-high ice that covered most all of Canada, swept into northern Wisconsin and Minnesota everywhere else. Of course, this is not a photo of that. We do not have that good of a paleotechnology, but it's a photo of Iceland. It's an analog for what that past might have looked like. And you can see the Ice Age trail on the map of Wisconsin approximating the limit of the ice sheet. Now, most people know this part of what I described before, but maybe 20,000 years is worth remembering because, of course, that's long in a human time scale. That's many, many human generations and before human writing and memory in many ways. But it's not long in a geological time scale. Humans are in the Americas at this point. They've just arrived relatively recently. So this is within the human time scale. And the other kind of number to pay attention to up there is that it's a 6-degree global cooling Celsius, about 11 Fahrenheit, that produces this mile-high ice sheet on top of Canada. And of course, today we're thinking about scenarios of 2 to 5 degrees global warming going the other way. So this is a relevant story for us, how this state was transformed in a human timescale from ice on top of us and no life under that ice to the world we see around us now. This is Madison 14,000 years ago. We have large animals, mastodons and sloths and cave bears and all the rest of it roaming the lands here. And the plants, this is actually a nice scientifically accurate description of this kind of open, boggy landscape and spruces and larches and ashes all growing together. The climate changes that produce this global warming and these ecosystem changes, you can see here. These are from the ice cores, the famous ice cores from Greenland and Antarctica. Let me see if the pointer works now. Great, we got it. So we're looking at time here, the last 22,000 years, from 22,000 years ago to 7,000 years ago. And the yellow dots are carbon dioxide concentration in the atmosphere. We know that from little bubbles of air trapped in those ice cores, which is truly amazing, that you can crack open that ice and release a little whiff of air from 20,000 years ago or even 800,000 years ago, and then measure the amount of carbon dioxide in parts per million. It's truly a remarkable scientific achievement to know this atmospheric composition. And so the yellow shows the carbon dioxide, the red and the blue shows temperatures in Antarctica, temperatures in globally, and it closely tracks. There's a very clear relationship between rising greenhouse gases and rising temperature. When you warm the world by 6 degrees, that ice melts. You can see, so this is what the world would have looked like 20,000 years ago. Whoops. There we go. 20,000 years ago with ice here and so forth. Anything that is dark brown would have been land 20,000 years ago, but is underwater now. Sea level rises by about 400 feet as a result of that rising temperature. So again, all within human history as humans are moving across these landscapes. And then what I'm going to really talk about in my work is understanding how species have adapted to this kind of climate change. So sort of setting the stage here in part one, this sort of global warming that we see. So now, as a paleoecologist, our job is to study ecosystems that don't exist anymore, in some cases, species that don't exist anymore. And so our tools of the trade, the records we have of the past, we call them macrofossils, the big bones, the microfossils, the things that you can only see maybe with a microscope or barely with the eye. This is the kind of work that I mostly do, is micropaleontology, working under a light microscope, pulling pollen out of mud. I'll talk more about that more. And one key point here is that you're going from, just maybe a few bones here and there, where you maybe find a mammoth in a ditch, or as you're ditching out someplace, to any cubic centimeter of mud could have thousands of these pollen grains. So you go from big fossils, but not many of them, to small fossils and thousands of them. And now my field is moving into the field of molecular fossils, biomarkers and ancient DNA. It's truly revolutionizing the field right now because now we have instruments that can detect small fragments of DNA that have persisted for thousands to even maybe a million years or so, and we now can have potentially billions of DNA fragments in a single cubic centimeter of mud, or in a bone, or a skull, or what have you. And so we really move into this sort of big data space as we start to go for these different kinds of measurements that we can do. And as I'm not an ancient day person, I'm starting to work in that space and collaborate with people, but it is totally cool. It is really, it's making headlines right now. There's all kinds of interesting things happening with that. You may have seen the stories about this sort of effort to maybe de-extinct animals, or at least create hybrids of ancient animals now extinct and modern animals, such as the dire wolves. I'm not sure I would have chosen to bring dire wolves back first from the de-extinction list, but that's the way it's worked. It's a hybrid of ancient genes pulled from dire wolf fossils, so that's the ancient DNA part, and then identifying some of those key marker genes and bringing them into the gray wolf chromosome, and then having these dire wolf/gray wolf pups here. So that's work that's happening in the field right now. And then also people here at UW Madison are also using DNA to find missing in action personnel from World War II and other past wars, where there's been known crash sites, for example, but they've never been able to conclusively identify who was in the crash site. So my work, my archives that I work with are lake sediments and lake muds. That's why I'm here in Wisconsin. We have lots of lakes, thousands of them. And each lake is a natural archive that beneath the water column that we might swim through or boat upon, there is a sediment column, a mud column, that is very slowly building up over time, and give it a few 10,000 more years, and these lakes might fill up over time and turn into bogs, the process of polutification. But for now, they're lakes, and they've got mud building up beneath them, and at a rough rate of maybe a centimeter of mud every decade or so. So let 1,000 years pass, and you might have a meter of mud, about 3 feet, building up within that lake. And the trees, the plants around that lake are producing pollen. Some of that pollen is produced, and broadcast by plants that use wind dispersal, like pine, like ragweed, all of our favorite hay fever species are broadcasting lots of pollen all around the air. Some, very few of it, will land on a female flower and perpetuate the species. It's a very inefficient way to do, hopefully you broadcast out billions of grains and one lands on a female flower, but pollen is cheap and so plants do that. But some of that pollen also lands on the surface of the water column, will center down through the water and then be captured in the mud that is building up slowly over time, along with other things. Fires and charcoals being produced. There might be isotopes telling us about different kinds of temperature conditions, all kinds of different markers, DNA and all the rest of it. And so then we can go out with small teams for the small lakes around here. We're actually going to go out in the field next week to eastern Wisconsin, 4 to 6 people on a couple of floating platforms and canoes, driving down into the sediments. We then bring the mud up. We're bringing it down 1 meter of mud at a time, bringing it back up, going back down again. We wrap it in that PVC tubes you see there, and then bring it back home for further analysis. And there's one of these sort of meters of mud. And so that student there is holding about 1,000 years of time in her hand, and we'll go on and sample that and go further. And so now we're going to see this animation here, going from a single site, a lake, to each dot here representing a lake where this kind of work has been done. This animation is kind of moving. I'm going to go ahead and restart it here. Just kind of watch it. I'll kind of narrate as we go, and I'll circle back again here. So every one of those circles, every one of those dots represents a place where someone has done a lake sediment record. This kind of a work we've been doing for decades now. We have many sites all over North America, all over the world. We can build databases and cool mapping visualizations like this here. And then what you're watching here is different colors correspond to different taxa and different species. And some of the ones to kind of focus on when I re-loop this is red is oak and blue. Red is oak and blue is spruce, and there's other taxa involved as well here. And what you're going to watch as we re-loop this is you're going to watch the ice sheets melt away. That's going to be the blue on the northern half of the continent. You're going to watch spruce die out and migrate north. And you're going to watch oak expand into places where spruce used to live. Let's try this again. Okay, so here we are. We're starting 22,000 years ago. We're going to go forward 500 years at a time. There's lots of ice. We're going to watch spruce start to expand as that ice melts away. We're going to watch oak start to expand. In a moment, spruce is going to start to die out here. You see this, the die-off of spruce, the expansion of north. This is all being driven by global temperature change. A global 6-degree warming is leading to these continental scale range shifts. And of course, plants are rooted organisms. They're sessile. They don't move themselves. So it's not the ants walking across the landscape here, it is seeds dispersing out, maybe by wind, maybe by birds or other animals, carrying from place to place, new populations founding in new areas while other populations are dying out. And so we see that a primary way that plants adapt to climate change is that they move. Just like birds migrate with the seasons, trees and plants will migrate in response to climate change as well. Another lesson we see from the past is that at any given location, any given site, we see multiple ecosystem transformations. That's here we have Devil's Lake, of course, one of our iconic sites that has been cored for this kind of lake sediment work. And we can start to see how do species adapt or respond. So we can see that at this one location, now what we're looking at here is a single record. And in geologist land, we often go from older sediments at the bottom to younger sediments at the top. The sediment is building upwards. So we often represent time going up from older to younger here. This is 14,000 years of history from this one sediment core from Devil's Lake here. And then the different curves here are different pollen abundances of pollen grains counted from different samples of mud at different horizons here of spruce and pine and oak and elm and poplar and birch, some of the major tree taxa today. And you can see these systems show these major ecosystem transformations being driven by a 6-degree global warming. Spruce forests and parklands are what we have there first, maybe some mastodons roaming around. Those then get replaced by pine forests. They get then replaced by oak and elm forests. So we're seeing this climate-driven turnover from one system to the next. And then we start to get to something maybe more like today. Oak forests, oak savannas, more fires, and so forth. One other thing we see, and we learn how species have adapted to the past, is that species and biomes don't march in lockstep. Each species is pursuing its own unique pathway, its own individual or individualistic response to climate change. You can see this with these nice examples here of spruce and ash. Spruce migrating northwards as temperatures rise. It's a pretty straight up response to warming. Northern populations expanding, southern populations dying out. But then ash doesn't move a whole lot. It goes from being not very abundant to being really abundant to being not very abundant again over this sort of 21,000 year sweep of history here. And so nowadays we think of spruce as a northern tree we'd find in the north woods. We think of ash as a southern tree you might find in southern Wisconsin or the eastern deciduous forest. But 15 to 13,000 years ago, they were coexisting and highly abundant together. So there's this idea of this reshuffling of species into novel ecosystems and novel communities. And that's a key lesson that the past brings to our expectations for today. Another key lesson is that if you actually think about, well, which species survived or didn't survive these climate changes, we all know that lots of big animals didn't survive. Our museums are full of the bones of the vanished giants of the past. About 2/3 of all genera of these big animals went extinct over this time period. But plants, it's actually pretty hard to find an example of an extinct plant from this time period. There's little ones here or there. One of the ones we do have an example of is this species of spruce, Picea critchfeldii spruce, that we have fossil localities of it, that we can identify that these are fossil spruce needles that are not like any modern spruce. It's an extinct spruce species. It seems to be in some kind of southern spruce that lived down here that didn't make it north when climates changed. So that is a climate-driven extinction of a plant, but it's more an exception than the rule. So plants have a resilience to this kind of climate change, and maybe the big animals not so much. So then this gets into the question, how do species adapt and survive under changing climates? One solution, as I've talked about, is range shifts. Even plants can move as climate drives them to die out in some places and expand into others. Or they can persist, like in much of the driftless area. There's these endemic species, like northern monkshood and the Iowa Pleistocene snail that seem to hunker down in little spots that protect them. They can adapt. They can change their body size or otherwise adapt to the changing environment. These are all strategies that plants and animals have used to adapt to these past climate changes. So this understanding of the past and this seeing of the world around us now is leading us to new solutions, moving away from a traditional sort of preservationist, restorationist approach to a understanding that we live in a dynamic world that we are certainly changing a lot right now, but has always been changing, and species have always adapted to these changes, and that we can as well, and we can help species do that. And so in management land, the framework for this is called RAD, Resist, Accept, Direct. The metaphor is if you have wind blowing your boat in some direction, you could resist that. You could spend a lot of energy and resources to go against the wind and stay in spot, but that might take some effort to do so and dollars and energy. Or you could just kind of go with wherever the wind blows you. You could accept those changes, or you could direct your system in some way, planting certain species or otherwise modifying systems to whatever your desired outcome is for protecting key species or services or what have you. And then a key lesson from the past is that species can adapt to climate change, even the big climate changes we are seeing and expect around us, if it's not too fast. And so a key point here then becomes it's the rate that matters. How fast is the climate system changing, and how quickly can species adapt on their own? How can we accelerate those adaptations? And so we can see that species have adapted to a 5 or 6 degree global warming and been just fine. And so there's all kinds of management adaptation strategies. If I would give a longer talk, I'd talk more about that. I'll just point out that sometimes accidentally we're helping species adapt. People love magnolias, they plant them in their backyards. And this is a nice paper showing that magnolias, which is more of a southern species, doesn't do well in northern Wisconsin, for example. Some people plant it in southern Wisconsin, but it's now escaped from people's backyards and is now naturalizing into the forests of New England. Probably wouldn't have made it there 500 years ago, but now temperatures have risen enough that magnolia seems to be doing just fine here. So whether this is good or bad, we can talk about the consequences of that. But in some way, you can think about this. We are helping the species move northward at a rate faster than we might not have been able to do so on its own. Another thing, of course, we can do is protect these key areas that have been shown to be key refuges for biodiversity during past climate change. And for places like the driftless area, it's this topographic complexity, all these different microclimates and microhabitats and little pockets where there might be a little bit of a cool spot or a sunny slope or whatever it is that might let some species have its little climate space that it best thrives in. So this topographic complexity, these kind of landscapes are critical to preserve. They have been refuges for biodiversity in the past, and we can expect to be refuges for biodiversity in the present. Okay, so I'll close there and just kind of give you the takeaways for this lessons from the past. Climate change is a big deal. A 5 to 6 degree global warming has had transformative, repeated impacts on places like the Devil's Lake. But we can see that species have adapted by shifting their range, transforming into novel associations, and many species surviving through it. We can see that key landscapes are essential for protecting species in this era of change, and that we can help species adapt by slowing rates of climate change, accelerating rates of adaptation, protecting key landscapes, and always, of course, doing good science. So I'll close this up there and just thank you for your support, for listening today and support of this work, through support of the National Science Foundation and UW-Madison, and then all the many students who have been involved in different stages of this work have been essential to this success. Thank you very much.
All right, wonderful to be here. Thank you for coming, and again, several acts that are hard to follow. My name is Andrew Stevens. I'm an assistant professor of agricultural and applied economics here on campus. And I think the big hook that brought me here tonight is the same hook that has had my phone ringing off the hook with news reporters asking me what the heck is going on with egg prices. So agricultural economists do a lot of things. We don't just follow food prices, but we certainly get the calls when there are stories in food prices. And so I thought I would take this opportunity to talk about how markets function to help develop the prices that we pay, specifically for the foods that we eat, but for all the goods that we purchase, and try to build some of that Econ 101 intuition and build on our lived experiences of grocery shopping and seeing these prices change in the current environment that we're in. So that's my goal today. You'll walk out of here self-identifying as a better economist than you came in. That's my hope. So here's something that if you do the grocery shopping in your household, or even just a little bit of the grocery shopping in your household, you already know. Or if you just watch the news, right? Egg prices are at a historic high. The most recent number is the highest price in nominal terms that we've seen, at over $6 for a dozen eggs, large grade A eggs. This is a national average released by the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And, you know, if we look sort of pre-pandemic, pre-2022, the price of a dozen eggs is fairly stable. It's not perfectly flat, but it's fairly stable, and we've seen a lot of volatility in the last couple of years, and the big story is that it's just so darn expensive, right? And so really, I want to explore how economics helps us understand what's going on behind this pattern that we're all familiar with. So I'm going to introduce a couple of concepts. I think some of the language is going to sound familiar, but I really want to build up from building blocks so that we can sort of see how these things all work. So the first concept I want to introduce is that of individual demand. So that is, every single one of us in this room today has an individual demand to consume different goods. And so the way I like to think about this is, for a given price of a good, how much am I, or are you individually willing to buy, right? And so if, as a thought experiment, if a dozen eggs costs $3, we can think about different individuals having different demands, right? So a family of 4 might eat eggs for breakfast for a day or two during the week, might have them as an ingredient in a meal. They might demand 1 dozen eggs at that price, whereas a professional baker who might be making pastries or other things using those eggs might demand 12 dozen eggs at that price. So there's heterogeneity, that is, there's lots of differences across individuals of how much quantity we demand at a given price. But if we can think about that individual demand, each of us being price sensitive among ourselves, we can add that all up and think about something called aggregate demand. That is, if the entire economy is just the people in this room, we could go around and say, for a given price of eggs, each of us has an individual quantity that we would demand, and we can add up those quantities across people and calculate an aggregate demand. So economists love these graphs where we put price on the y-axis and quantity on the x-axis. I'm going to show you way too many of these graphs over the next 10 minutes, so I want to get us comfortable with this. And the idea here is that a demand curve is tracing out this relationship between how much quantity is demanded at different prices, right? So the way I like to read this graph is, you say, if the price of eggs is $3 per dozen eggs, this red curve tells us how many total eggs would be demanded by the people in the economy. So I made up this number, 500 million in a week, but right, this is how we get from the story of our individual household demands to economy-wide aggregate demand in these demand curves. And here it makes sense to think that when the price is really high, some of those people just are not going to choose to keep consuming as many eggs. And so the quantity would reduce down from 500 million. But if there's a fire sale, eggs are $1 a dozen, oh my gosh, I guess I'm having quiche tomorrow, right? Demand is a lot higher. You might buy eggs and cook those instead of some other food. This is probably the most jargony word I want to throw at you today, but it's elasticity. Economists love talking about the elasticity of things, which is a fancy way of saying how sensitive something is to, in this case, prices. So if we're thinking about the elasticity of demand, that's a fancy way of saying how price sensitive is demand for a particular good. And so both of these demand curves slope down, which is a fundamental stylized fact of economics, that when prices are high, we demand less of something, and when prices are lower, we demand more. But there's a really important difference between these two demand curves. The one on the left, that's I'm calling elastic demand, is a very price-sensitive demand curve. If the price of eggs changes a little bit, the quantity demanded is changing a lot, really price-sensitive. The demand curve on the right, this inelastic demand, is something where we would say that demand is very not price sensitive. If the price of eggs changes a little bit, where am I? You give me a new clicker and I just get confused. I apologize, everyone. But inelastic demand, not very price sensitive in the quantity that we're demanding. All right, I've talked a lot about demand, but most of you are expecting the other shoe to drop, so here it is. Let's talk about supply, right? So eggs come from somewhere. I'm guessing most of us are not producing our own eggs. I bet someone in this room is producing their own eggs. Call me afterwards. You'll see if we can do a little deal on the side, right? But we want to think about supply in two different ways. So first of all, there's the supply that we interact with when we go to the grocery store, which is, hey, the store is selling the eggs. I don't really care where the eggs came from. I'm buying them from the store. In that case, supply is what eggs are in stock at the grocery store. In a bigger sense, though, the grocery store is getting those eggs from producers. And we can think about the producers, these poultry farmers, these laying farmers. Those farmers aren't stuck with a fixed inventory of eggs, right? They're producing eggs all of the time, and if we think about the medium to long run, they can scale up production or scale down production in response to the prices that they're receiving. So the idea that supply is different in the short run at the grocery store versus the long run in the producers also helps us think about elasticity of supply. How price sensitive is the supply of eggs? We might think that in the long run, that is the farmers who have all of these chickens, right? As the price of eggs goes up, they might be able to invest in new barns, grow their flocks, produce more eggs. That is, for higher prices, the quantity that they're willing to supply goes up. At lower prices, they're able to downsize because, hey, it's expensive to have all those chickens, right? But that in the short run, that is, when you go to the grocery store, that supply can't respond to how much demand there is. It's fixed at a given quantity, so no matter what the equilibrium price would be, you can't expand supply in the immediate short run. So we think about sort of this elastic supply versus truly inelastic, perfectly inelastic supply in the short run. Now, we're jumping into the third month of Econ 101. This is the fastest econ class you've ever taken, but we're at market equilibrium here. When you put demand together with supply, these two forces give us prices that clear the market. That is, there's no price, in the way I've drawn this graph, there's no price other than $3 per dozen eggs, where the amount supplied to the market is equal to the amount demanded by consumers. And if you imagine, say, if the price were higher, a lot more eggs would be provided to the marketplace, but there aren't enough people demanding those eggs, there would be a surplus of eggs in the marketplace and people would bid down the price. If the price were lower, fewer eggs are produced, more eggs are demanded, you'd have empty shelves. Grocery stores are going to start raising those prices to keep eggs on the shelf, and the market equilibrium price is the one where these numbers basically equate each other. And that's, well, economists love this stuff, right? Markets are beautiful because they incorporate so much information about the costs of production and individuals' demand for different goods, and they tell us things through market prices. All right. But you've come to econ class, you've been dutiful students, but I promised you eggs, right? So what's going on with eggs right now? Because we're not having the same conversation about other goods in the marketplace, not like we are with eggs. So what's happening in this market specifically? So the first stylized fact about the market for eggs is that the demand for eggs is inelastic demand relative to a lot of other goods. The key insight here is that there aren't a lot of good substitutes for eggs. You think about a lot of, if I think about, say, pork chops, maybe you're different, but for me, if the price of pork chops doubles, I might just say, oh, I'll buy a beef steak instead, or I'll get tofu and make a stir fry. There are other things that are good substitutes for that pork chop. But if you're baking a cake, if you're making an omelet, there aren't good egg substitutes. And so my price sensitivity for this good, and many people's price sensitivity is pretty low. So we've got inelastic demand for eggs, and we've got inelastic supply for eggs, at least in the short to medium term. When you're at the grocery store, you've got this fixed quantity, but the farmers who produce eggs, they're making long-term investments in their in their barns, in their laying infrastructure, in their flocks, and those are things that don't double in scale very quickly or easily. And so it's very difficult for these producers to double their production over the course of a week or two. In fact, it's impossible, so we're thinking about on the course of years to double production if prices are high. If we put on top of all of this, right? There's a bird flu going around. So the highly pathogenic avian influenza is this endemic disease in birds and poultry. There have always been outbreaks of bird flu, but since February of 2022, we've really seen this prolonged big outbreak. And so this map is showing you all of the birds affected by the current outbreak of avian influenza. We see that these hotspots are Iowa, Ohio, California. Iowa is the biggest producer of table eggs. And since the start of this current outbreak, over 168 million birds have been affected. Affected is a very nice way of saying have been killed or have died from this disease. If you think a laying hen produces, 5 or 6 eggs a week, that's a lot of eggs that would have been produced that never made it to market. Right? So this is this big external shock to production, and let's use all the tools that I've just sort of built up for us to sort of make sense of this big shock. So if we put that inelastic demand for eggs together with that inelastic supply for eggs, before the bird flu outbreak, we would have some going price for eggs at some quantity that was more or less stable. This sort of reflects the fact that egg prices, before the COVID-19 pandemic were largely stable because there's not a lot changing about the marketplace. But the bird flu outbreak basically shifts the supply curve. And I want to build intuition of what that means. It means that for any given market price of eggs, all of the suppliers, all of the producers of eggs, those egg farmers, can produce less because some of those producers have to get shut down because their flocks have been infected. The way economists look at that is we say we shift that supply curve to the right because for any price, the amount supplied is less than it was before. What that does is it pushes the equilibrium where it intersects demand up and to the left. And what we see is the total amount of eggs that are being produced and sold in the market decreases, and the price of eggs that clears the market increases. And that's what we're seeing in the marketplace now, is that, hey, there's this big shock to supply. It's harder to produce eggs than it was before because we're losing all of these egg-laying hens. And to clear the market, demand hasn't shifted, so we see increased market prices at the grocery store. All right, so this is my last slide, and I just want to sort of emphasize a couple of key points here. So first is that there are some things about eggs that make this unique and why we haven't seen this in other products in the economy. One of them is just the way that this good is produced. You have to wait around for a chick to develop into an adult chicken or a hen who's laying eggs, and it takes twice as long as a chick to develop into an egg-laying hen as it takes for a chick to develop into a broiler that you might harvest for meat. So it takes about 20 weeks from a new chick hatching to starting to lay its own eggs commercially. It's a long time, and farmers don't have control over that, right? So there's particular things about the egg industry that make them different even than, say, chicken meat, which hasn't seen quite the same price effects. But the other thing that I really want to emphasize is that prices are the way that our markets work. So they make it so that when you go to the grocery store, there are still eggs on the shelf, right? If prices didn't respond to changes in supply and demand, we'd be in a situation where, there are mismatches, right? There are certain goods where there's so many items available that no one wants to buy, and there are other items where, they're completely stocked out because they're so cheap relative to what people are demanding. So as frustrating as it is to see these big price increases, to me it's a signal of markets working and communicating the information about the struggles with supply to producers so that people who value this good the most are still able to access it. If you came for any hot insights about when those prices are coming down or what public policy is going to do or what we should be doing with public policy, I'm going to leave you disappointed. Come catch me outside after the fact. But hopefully now when people say it's all supply and demand, that isn't just going over your heads, and you've got a little bit more of the machinery under the hood to think about those things critically. Thank you so much.
Well, thanks again for coming out and making this such a special evening and event. I'm Gary. I teach in computer science here at the university, but I also do a lot of game development. It's something I'm very passionate about and very excited to just share with you a little bit what that experience is like and maybe try to tempt you into dabbling and seeing if it's something you might enjoy as well. So just to help me get a sense, by a show of hands, are there any game developers here? All right, so I see 3. Okay, so just a few folks. The good news is for the rest of you, you are in very good company. I think the most celebrated game developers I'm aware of did not start out that way. They were also not game developers until they developed their first game. And so what I'm going to ask you to do is something game developers often ask players to do in their games, which is to do a little bit of role-playing. I'm going to ask you to imagine for the next 10 to 15 minutes that you are a game developer, that it's your job to come up with an amazing game experience for some people to play. And in order to do that, so here's our role-playing that we're going to engage in. The first thing we're going to try to come up with is what kind of experience is our player going, or are our players, if there are multiple of them, are our players going to have? And there are some contexts where it will be very helpful to kind of piece apart, like, what is the technical difference between a board game or a computer or video game or a puzzle or an escape room or a sport. But I think for this next 15 minutes or so, we're going to treat them all as just kind of fun, engaging experiences that players of that game might have. And so what I'm going to give you just a few moments here to think about. I'll just be quiet for a few moments so you can think about what are some experiences that you've had. I think the things we've heard over the last 45 minutes or so might give us some fodder for this. Some experiences that you really remember clearly, enjoying and wanting to share with people, maybe in a way that's beyond just telling them you had the experience, but you would like to share it in a way that allows other people to experience some of those same feelings and emotions that you had during that experience. So I'll just pause here for just a few moments to give you a chance to think about some experiences that might make good experiences within the game that you're going to design here with me. All right, I hate to risk interrupting, but we do have a limited amount of time here. So now that you have this idea, maybe a couple experiences that you think would be interesting for other people to engage with, the next thing we're going to do, just at a very high level, is try to think about the balance of things that will go into this game that we're going to design to help people have this experience and experience it for themselves. And different game developers have a little different voice and a different way of presenting an experience to players. So that's what the pictures here are meant to help represent. In fact, the leftmost picture is a picture of a puppet show. It's kind of serving double duty here. It's both, I think, aesthetically very interesting and beautiful. And the aesthetics of the game is certainly something that players interact with and kind of feed off of. But it's also representing storytelling, which in a lot of games, especially when you're playing a role or imagining yourself in a role that's different than your everyday ordinary, that story and narrative is something that can be important in a lot of games. Sometimes on top of that, or sometimes instead of that, the middle picture here is meant to represent social interactions. So some games are very much about collaborating with the people you're playing with or competing against them. Sometimes it's just about forming a connection, kind of identifying things you have that are in common or different, or maybe even just communicating and giving you some challenges to try to communicate your way through. And then on the far right is this kind of puzzle box. And again, it represents sometimes a literal puzzle, like you've maybe solved in the past. It's challenging to figure out. But oftentimes in games, these puzzles are kind of embedded in just systems of interactions. That it takes some time to figure out and understand how these different parts of the game are interacting, and to figure out how you can make use of that system to accomplish whatever the goal you have might be. So we've started here with your idea of some experience and of your voice within this game. There's a quote, there's a computer scientist, which is my department here, named Alan Perlis, who has a quote that everything should be built from the top down, except for the first time. And I think with games in particular, we can start with this high-level vision and goal of where we would like the players playing our game to be. But the rules are kind of, in game design, are kind of our primary colors that painters have, our notes that musicians have. And they interact in sometimes very counterintuitive ways. Like I think if I'm when I'm cooking, which I'm not a terribly amazing cook, but I know that if I put a little more sugar in this sauce, it's going to get a little sweeter, and I can keep doing that to make it a little sweeter and a little sweeter. And a lot of times with rules in games, if I turn that rule and make it a little more and a little more, all of a sudden we've turned from a game where everybody feels like there's abundance and comfort to a game where there's scarcity and everybody's feeling like they need to protect the resources that they've acquired so far. So one of the things that's helpful to do as a developer, as a game designer, is to get practice with these rules. And one of the things that is very within reach of a lot of people is to take games that already exist and try to just change the rules ever so slightly to get the experience and to better understand and appreciate, really to respect how important some of those rules that seem like they're just kind of filler are to the experience that you end up having. So, I mean, maybe just as a couple of examples here, the picture on the top in the middle is Monopoly, is maybe one of the more well-known board games up here. You could imagine instead of having to pay to purchase one of the properties and to build houses and to build hotels, rather than paying money to the bank, you could imagine that your money actually goes to the other players around the table. And so that whenever somebody buys a property, everybody else that doesn't suddenly become threatened by that or worry that they're going to then have to save up more money to pay you if they land on that space in the future. But instead they say, oh, this is great, now I have more money and I can do other things. And that's actually a little bit of the history of Monopoly. It was originally a game designed by Lizzie Magie called Landlords. And it actually had two sets of rules that it came with. One is what people often know as Monopoly, and the other is the variation that I just described that feels very different. And I think the designer's intent was actually that people would be scared by the capitalism and that the monopoly rules bring out in people. If one person takes over everything, what does that mean for our world? But that was the one that a lot of people kind of ran away with and enjoyed. The bottom middle picture here is Wordle. I know Connections is another popular game that a lot of people will play on their phone from time to time. And that's another one that I think is very accessible. If you're interested in playing around with game design and trying it out, you could try coming up with maybe a word for Wordle or a set of words for the game Connection. Connection, if you're not familiar, you get 16 words. And they're organized in 4 groups, but you don't know what the groups are. So you have to figure out which words go together by some relationship that the designer has put into them. And when you're designing these games, you might even design them just for some family members or for some friends. You could use some words that you know like have special meaning among that group of people, both to share the enjoyments of kind of reminiscing and finding those things together. And to get some experience seeing what it is like to design parts of a game like this. So this is how, as game designers and developers, we develop intuition and kind of practice our craft and get better at it. And one of the things that can be tricky is that when we're rolling dice and flipping cards and clicking mouse buttons, we sometimes get so immersed in the system that we lose, at least I will speak for myself, I've heard other people share a similar sentiment, it's easy to lose track of our goal, the experience of the person that's playing the game. When people say they're game developers, they think, well, you're making what's in the box, but of course the paper and the plastic that is in that box really doesn't have much value if it doesn't elicit the emotions and the kinds of experiences that we're interested in. I'll also say that as you're formulating this idea of what kind of rules you can fit together to lead people into the experiences that you're interested, this for me is one of the most fun parts of game development. Because in my head, everything works out perfectly. It's like impossibly perfect. People are enjoying things in exactly the way I'm imagining in my head. And that never happens when I bring the game out for the first time in front of other folks. And originally what I thought was, well, this is just because I'm new. I'm not very good yet. And over time what I've learned is that even from the game designers and developers that I have the most respect for, their games are terrible the first time they get to in front of another player as well. But what's different about the more experienced game developers is that they're not surprised by that. They just understand that's part of the process. That those rules interact, if it's a game that's at all different from other things that they've played or seen, they're just not going to be able to anticipate how all the rules interact with each other, much less with the players and all the different experiences players might bring to a game like this. So this perfect idea in the back of your head about how this is going to work really needs to survive a kind of gauntlet before it will become a game that the players will be able to enjoy. And that's called iterative development. And what we typically will do, what I will typically do, is actually try to put as little work as possible into my first prototype of my game. It'll require a lot of suspension of disbelief on my part. It'll require a lot of memory and understanding that certain things don't look the right way yet. But what I need to do is find a way that I can try this out. This might be opening up a paint program and just dragging the mouse around and drawing lines, or it might be drawing on the back of some cards and flipping them over and trying to think of how I would respond to the different situations that they might prompt me with. And as you go through changing your idea into that first thing that could be played at least by yourself, even if it's a multiplayer game, I'll usually either try to switch back and forth between the multiple players or try to have some way of generating a response that the other players might have prompted me with to get a sense for how that feels before I ever show it to another person. And it's not until I've gone through a few iterations of development that I will have the courage to try to show somebody else the game that I'm working on. And I will not start with any friends or family because they are too dear to my life. I will start with other game developers because they understand the difference between problems they see that are just kind of minor polished things and things that are very important structural things to like understand and to address before that game goes further. So I go through a few more iterations of this cycle with people who are a little bit more experienced developers until the game seems to be working pretty well with them. And then finally I'll share it with some players, like people who I don't know, to see how they experience the game, to hear what kind of feedback they give me, to see how well it matches up with my hopes and expectations for how that system of rules would be experienced. So, once you get through the end of that iterative refinement, your game is in front of people and they're experiencing it the way that you hoped, you're on to the next game. In fact, it would be my advice to never just have one game that you're working on, because it's too easy to get stuck. I always try to have many ideas of games, and many that I'm working on at any given point in time. And I hope if this sounds like something that's interesting to you, I hope you don't stop pretending. Continue to try out some of the ideas that you had come up with earlier. We are kind of in a golden age of gaming. Every year there's more games being developed of all different formats than the previous year. More voices and more kinds of people are getting into game development. They're developing experiences for players that we've never seen or experienced in the past. So again, I'm grateful to have had this time to just kind of share with you some of my experiences with games, and hope to share and motivate you to experiment and enjoy the same. So thank you.
Okay, we're going to do this together. So, we come to the final segment of SoundWaves. It's always about the music, and it becomes difficult to talk about because music is very abstract. So it's a kind of storytelling, but if you think about the two Rachmaninoff pieces that you just played at the beginning of this program, so these pieces are unfamiliar to me, probably unfamiliar to a lot of you. And if you think about your memories of those pieces, you probably have some impressions, right? Like big thunderous chords and sudden changes of mood and beautiful harmonies and beautiful melodies. But if Kit instead had come up and told a bunch of jokes, you could probably go home and tell your friends some of those jokes. You'd remember some of them. So we have this level of abstraction in musical storytelling that makes it both challenging but incredibly rewarding, because it's slippery. So let's talk a little bit about the Rachmaninoff first. So these pieces are called etudes, they're studies, right, but they come across as short pieces, little tiny stories. Are they actually studying some kind of piano technique?
It's a little hard to say with Rachmaninoff. I mean, if you go back from Rachmaninoff 75, 80 years, to Chopin's day, the connection between the title etude and finger exercise was quite a bit closer. And so in the Chopin etudes, you can definitely see their origin as exercises where the composer is sort of testing out particular aspects of piano technique and challenging the pianist to improve that. But with Chopin, he also made it part of his mission to be sure that these pieces are also beautiful and worth listening to. And so people still program them today, unlike, those of you who had piano lessons, if you had Hanon or Czerny or something like that, you certainly would never take those and perform them for an audience. No one would want to listen. So by Rachmaninoff's day, the idea that these are, musical morsels that pursue some sort of abstract goal and are not really about one particular technique, that approach had developed quite a bit. I mean, I could say the first of the etudes I played is kind of about double intervals, about sort of parallel fifths, parallel sixths, kind of distances like this, and so your fingers are kind of doing these complicated alternations. The last one I played more about sort of repeating chords and getting a good fortissimo, a good loud sound. But these are very abstract, and the truth is, in each of them, your fingers are doing all kinds of different things, which is not so much true in Chopin.
So in a short piece of music, musical storytelling is about memory. So we have a theme, hopefully it's memorable, and we maybe hear it again, hear it transformed, hear something that's very different from it. These pieces are about 3 minutes long. Is Rachmaninoff able to create a short story with one or two characters that I feel like there weren't big surprises in the pieces, so the development musically kind of made sense.
Right. I mean, of course, there's limited scope for development. I mean, the word development in music, it's often associated with the sonata, with a substantial piece of music that, is in several movements and lasts for a total of 20 minutes or something like that, where there's enough time to sort of present fairly extensive themes that have a lot of interesting little details in them, and where there are lots of opportunities to transform them and play around with them and then start combining different themes. So in an etude, there's just not enough time to do any of that. And so development becomes more about, taking just a small kernel of an idea and just seeing what grows from that one kernel rather than combining complex and intricate entities that need to unfold over a lot of time.
So when I was listening to the Rachmaninoff, I was thinking about reading novels. I read a lot of books, and there is a style in the modern novel that I've encountered a lot, where chapter 1 is told from one character's point of view, and then there's a shift. Chapter 2 is another character, and sometimes it's just 2, but sometimes there's 5 or 6 different characters who essentially become the narrators of the story, and it creates this textural change. And we do have textural change in music. And it's interesting to talk about it as textural change. English really has a paucity of words to describe sound, and so we borrow words from our other senses. So if we have big thundering chords and then something much lighter, we would call that a change in texture, even though there's not actually something being touched. And we use words like bright and dark to describe sound. And we say lush, which is like a sight word, what a field will look lush. Or we say angular, which is kind of a touch or sight word. It's interesting that I don't know if there's any languages that do have words that more, like the word loud describes sound. But beyond that, even soft has multiple meanings beyond the sound word. But in a sonata, we've talked about sonata form and development sections here at SoundWaves in past events of this year, and as you say, there's time for development of material, and themes can transform, and we can come back to them. And in a piece that's 3 minutes long, there's not time for that, but there is time for these sort of shiftings of color and feel. And I would say, and I wonder if you agree, that this is what composers are playing with. Like, in this short period of time, how much can we get out of that? We're not just going to go boom, 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 and play the same chord over and over again until the clock says it's 3 minutes, and we're
Philip
not.
Glass, maybe.
Philip Glass says that, yeah. So what are your thoughts about that, about these sort of texture, color changes in short pieces?
Yeah, I think that's right. And
Can you play a little of one of the Rachmaninoff on and off, just a little of part of where the things change? Putting him on the spot here, because he already had to do that when it was done.
Okay, so let me think for a second here. Okay, yeah, it's kind of hard to jump in the middle here, but
Maybe just play the beginning of one of them.
well, sure. I mean, so the first one, I mean, you know, it starts off, you know, very, very sort of smooth and flowing, and as I said, it's sort of these parallel strands of music that one hears. I mean, the left hand is doing this sort of very curvaceous shape, and then the right hand, there are two voices sort of in parallel that are doing kind of a more compressed version of the same thing. So it sounds like this. Starts to open up a little bit. I mean, towards the end, you know, he starts experimenting a little bit with sort of slightly more angular and bumpy versions of the same idea. So. Goes to town.
And I noticed that all of the words that you're using to describe these textures are all like bumpy and curvaceous, and they're all touch.
Yeah.
We just don't have any vocabulary other than that's very metaphorical.
That's right.
So since we're talking about short forms, short stories, and how we create a short story in sound, you're playing this piece by George Walker, and it's short, and it's a piano sonata.
Right. It seems like a contradiction.
It seems like a contradiction. And yet there's a structure to these movements.
Yeah, for sure.
So tell us a little bit about the composer first.
Okay, yeah, so George Walker, his dates, if I'm remembering right, were 1922 to 2018, so a good long life. He was a wonderful pianist and first-rate composer. He was the first African-American to win the Pulitzer Prize, and sort of a child prodigy. He went to Oberlin at the age of 15 or something like this. And he wrote 5 piano sonatas over the course of his life. I'm going to be playing the second one, which was written in the 60s, I think 1966 or something like that. So as Dan said, I mean, one of the most notable features of it is it has 4 movements, which sounds very ambitious, but each one is sort of 2 or 3 minutes, and so he has to be very concise in the way that he develops his ideas. And as I said, there's not time for sort of big, long, soaring themes with lots of inner intricacies. But instead, he builds the whole thing around a sort of a particular kind of music theoretical concept, which I can get into. You know, I mean, if I explain it, it'll all sound very kind of mathematical, but the result is that it has a very distinctive kind of sound. The harmonic language is sort of immediately recognizable and has a certain sort of consistency that ties the 4 movements together.
When I was listening to it, I was thinking, how would you describe this? And I came up with almost tonal.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, so to get into the music theory just a little bit, it's built around a particular scale. And it's a scale that has a lot of symmetry in it. And so, I mean, to just sort of try and describe it without getting hyper-technical. The chromatic scale that you know, all Western instruments are built around, basically, has 12 notes, so it's a cycle of 12. So in a nice coincidence, it's just like a clock. You go around, start at C and work your way up, you know, through C sharp and D and so on, and eventually you wind up back at C. It's an octave higher, but it's still the same note. So this idea of the clock, the sort of cycle of the chromatic scale. So Walker builds his whole piece around a scale that just sort of selects particular hours on that clock face. So if you imagine a clock with the, like, maybe you've put a transparency over the clock, and you put a red dot on 12 o'clock, and you put a dot on 1 o'clock, and then you put a dot on 4 and 5, and then you put another dot on 8 and 9. So 1, 2, 4, 5, 8, 9. And what's interesting is if you take that transparency and rotate it for a little bit, eventually, once the dot that was originally on 12 gets around to 4, you've got the same pattern. It looks exactly the same as it was when it started. So anyway, so
Can you hear that?
yeah, so this is like noon, and then this is 1, and then this is 4, and 5, and 8, and 9. So there's the scale. And then we can go back to noon at the top there. These are both noon.
So part of the reason why this is almost tonal is that you can build chords that we recognize out of those building blocks.
That's right. And see, so a scale that has this nice sort of symmetry to it, it has the property that if you can find any particular chord in there, like you can find a G minor chord embedded in that scale, well, any chord that you can find in there, you can also find the same chord transposed by an interval of a major third, if you're a music theory geek, you know what I mean? So not only does the scale contain this, but it also contains this, which is the same thing, but up a minor third. And then, you know, you can transpose that up a minor third, and there you go. You've got 3 different minor chords buried in there, sort of 3 chords for the price of 1. And you know, scales that aren't so symmetrical don't have that kind of property. And so, as I said, I mean, it sounds very abstract, but I think, you know, when you hear the sonata, you'll sort of get the feeling that, yeah, there are various of these familiar-looking chords, and they're sort of shifting one to the other in ways that you certainly wouldn't hear in Mozart. But it's very sort of evocative and creates this, you know, this nice sort of smoothly slithering kind of harmonic language.
So one more thing before we actually hear the piece. There's a theme and variations,
Yes,
movement,
that's first.
and that's a very typical classical music. I mean, Mozart and Haydn would write themes and variations, Brahms would write themes and variations, and with a piece that's short, there couldn't be that much development in the theme and variations, and we couldn't be dealing with a very long theme. Can you play the theme?
Yeah, sure. So it's all of 4 measures long. So it goes like this. And hopefully you'll sort of hear maybe echoes of those chords I was playing a second ago. That's it. And so then he takes that and, you know, because it's so short, he can fit in 10 variations plus a little reprise at the end. And, you know, the characters vary in sort of in the way you expect from a traditional theme and variations. So they sort of build up gradually for the first couple of variations, and then, you know, you sort of back and forth between fiery and subdued, and, you know, some of them mischievous, some of them angular, some of them more lyrical. But yeah, it's all over in a jiffy. And
well, I think that the audience can hear that from moment to moment we have these chords which sound like old music,
yeah.
but they never find a home. So they never go and take us to a home place, and yet they're consonant and they have a beauty, and it gives a kind of a unresolution,
Right.
continuous idea, like a river that keeps flowing. Again, we don't have sound ways to describe it.
Right, yeah. So then the second movement, you know, takes the same scale, the same kinds of chords, although what's interesting about that scale is not only are there minor chords embedded in it, but there are also major chords embedded in it, 3 different major chords. And so the second movement kind of is more about the major chords, so it has, you know, the traditional associations with major. It's brighter, it's more jovial in general, and but it's got the same sort of trick that you know, it doesn't sort of settle on one major chord, but on 3 different ones that sort of trade off and morph one into the other.
Well, I think we want to hear it. After we're done, oh, do you have something else?
Well, I can just quick say there's the third movement is you know, quite profound, slow, tragic, very deep. So obviously an emphasis on the minor again. And then the fourth movement it starts off this very sort of easygoing rondo. So like many classical sonatas, ends with this form that's kind of loose and flexible, and sort of the couple of ideas that keep coming back. But it starts off very sort of laid back and pastoral, and then suddenly sort of blows up. And then the process repeats. So there are like these 2 blow-ups, and then again it's done. And it ends in a very brilliant, virtuoso way, reflecting Walker's status as a really great pianist.
Great, so I'm sure you want to hear this.
Yeah.
I just would say, since we don't have time for question periods at SoundWaves, presenters are over here. We'll be over here. If you want to ask anybody anything, feel free to come talk to us. I would like to know whether you like this format with music at the beginning. You can also talk to Samantha and Francesca, who I think are somewhere out there, over there. They're wearing name tags, so if you want to let them know your thoughts, that'd be great too. And I just want to thank everyone for coming. It's been a great year. It's been an eventful year. Getting to the end of the academic year, we can all be thankful about things calming down, hopefully for the summer. And thank you so much for coming. Let's hear some Walker.
Great.